Immigration Minister Marc Miller was among them there, and he is with us live in studio now. Hi, Minister. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions about the trip in the efforts to stave off those tariffs, but I did want to start off on what has consumed a lot of our attention over the past few days, and that's the events of what took place in the Oval Office. And I just wondered, from your perspective, as you watch it like the rest of us, if you have a view on what this means. Like, if Donald Trump is willing to essentially berate somebody who's trying to stave off a dictator, what does that mean for a country like Canada that has, relied on a friendship and an allyship with the U.S. for so long?
Well, I saw what you saw and what everyone else saw, Vashi, and I don't want to extrapolate about what that means for the relationship with Canada. We're in deep with the U.S. currently. We don't like the way it treats its closest ally, but I think for those looking and seeing what the future is for Ukraine based on that meeting, they need to know that Canada is going to stand with Ukrainian people, and that is steadfast.
As far as the efforts go, your trip to Washington, the meetings that you had one meeting with Tom Homan, the border czar. My understanding is you've also spoken to the Secretary of Homeland Security. What can you tell us about the content of those meetings and whether you think the message is being received?
I definitely think the message is being received loud and clear. The challenge, I think, is we have no guarantees as to what the outcome will be on Monday or Tuesday. And I don't necessarily think that was the intention of the meetings, to get some hard, fast guarantee based on the exchange of information and the work that we do to make sure that we're both taking care of our common border. The challenge I face is I can't take any of that for granted, and I need to be able to leave it all out there and fight for Canada as much as I can. That includes working with people that I may not necessarily share the same ideology, principles with, but I do share the desire to keep our border safe, whether it's drugs, guns, fentanyl in this case, but also the challenges that we face as a country with respect to irregular migration. So I do think the meeting I had on Friday with Secretary Kristi Noem, the meeting that we had, David McGuinty and I, with Tom Hellman, were good ones. Whether they will guarantee the result, again, it's not the objective, but I think they were productive. We showed them the facts as they stand: 90% decrease in irregular migration from Canada to the U.S. The matters that we're taking very seriously in and around fentanyl and the impact that that's having at the same time in Canada as the U.S., but more importantly, the need to work together to make sure that we're sharing information, that we're working on keeping that border safe and secure, and not to turn a liability in what is an asset in the way we manage a border where 400,000 people cross seamlessly every day.
When you talk about it being productive, how do Canadians kind of square that with what we are inundated with, which is the rhetoric, particularly coming from the White House, right? And this constant threat around sovereignty, and then the threats around tariffs and the doubling down and saying all these things. Like, is it your impression that the people who work for Donald Trump are not taking the same view, or they're taking what you're saying more seriously? Like, how do we square that?
Well, we can't, and neither can anyone that hears it and has any logical thought process. We believe it's a win-win situation to be able to have free trade with the U.S. We all make money. We all do better as a society doing that, and we have the proof points to prove it. I think the challenge there is making sure that we continue to work with an administration that has not been treating us well, and we continue to reinforce the fact that they need us as an ally. We aren't prepared to proactively impose tariffs, for example, because they send guns and drugs to Canada. We want to make sure that stops. However, if they do impose tariffs, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, or any other date that has been hanging over our head, we'll be ready to fight back and to continue to fight for Canadians for the long run, and perhaps prepared to dig in for 4 years.
Well, as far as Canada's strategy does go in the medium to long run, I wonder, look, you and I have done many interviews about issues at the border, but when you look at it on a factual basis, and all parties have talked about this, there's a sliver of the action at the Canadian border that there is at the southern border, and yet the threats coming from Donald Trump are similar in nature, if not completely equal. Does there come a point in time in which we don't do something like a point of fentanyl czar, if in fact the problem doesn't exist? Like, are we near that point?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a hypothetical. It's an important one. I do think the facts matter. I think for Canadians who have seen their families impacted by opioids, they should know that the appointment of a fentanyl czar isn't cosmetic in nature. It is really designed to eradicate something that's hitting American families as it is Canadian families. So that is important. But clearly, at some point, the Trump government, President Trump, will have to make a decision whether we hope it's based on facts, we hope it's based on that productive relationship that we've had with them for centuries. That is just the reality that we're facing, and if that isn't the case, then we'll have to hit back.
Speaking of hitting back, I know that your government already detailed when we thought they were coming a month ago exactly what the counter-tariff situation would look like. We've also heard from a lot of people in different sectors, and in particular I would highlight the auto sector, because they have said from the union side to the business side of things, or the company side of things, that they could envision a scenario in which if those tariffs are applied, the entire industry collapses within a week. That would require something big, I would imagine, from your government, be it a bailout, be it special attention to the people who have lost their jobs. Are you in a position to do that without Parliament being in session for another few weeks? Like, if we are looking at that kind of a timeline, is it negligent not to be there?
You know, there are a number of scenarios that we're looking at, but let's not minimize it. There are 1 million jobs that are at risk. There are measures that we can take without Parliament sitting to support industries, to support people that will be laid off. The effects will be felt over time. They'll be felt in Canada as they will in Minnesota, in Ohio, that has that entire ecosystem that is interdependent with Canada, with the economy in Ontario. And that's something that we hope to keep advocating with the U.S. as they in turn turn to the President and say, hey, this doesn't work for us, doesn't work for our state. A lot of those states are dependent on seamless exports with Canada.
Are they saying that a lot? Because they've been pretty quiet.
That's the assurance that we've been given. You know, there's a lot of work that is done not only publicly but in private and back channels, and I think that's the relationship that we keep maintaining and underscoring with governors, with representatives, with senators, that this relationship is one that's worth maintaining and we're your strongest ally.
Just to challenge the point of what you have in your toolbox at this very moment, without the consent or endorsement of other parties that represent other Canadians in different constituencies, if you have to pump billions of dollars into the auto sector to keep it afloat, and I take your point, things are going to take place over a long period of time, but Flavio Volpe, in the head of Unifor, told me explicitly, in a week that industry is gone. Like, if that is the case and the timeline is that short, does that not necessitate more input from more parliamentarians rather than your government just making a unilateral decision?
It may, and if it comes to that, we may have to take action that makes sure that we're supporting the Canadian economy. Again, we're hoping to avoid this, Vashi, but that means staying attentive to what happens on Monday and Tuesday, but that isn't the end point in time. I don't think this is something that is going to change for the next 4 years, and there will always be threats hanging over our heads, and we'll have to adjust in consequence, and that may mean Parliament sitting at some point.
Just one quick question about that nature of the threat. Is it your view, after having the conversations that you have after your trip to D.C., that this is about the border? Or is it your view that there is some utility that the President has spoken about on multiple occasions, that his economic advisors now continually speak out about as well, to tariffs that they see? And is that what informs your thought that that will remain a threat for the next 4 years?
Well, it's the President's tool to raise cash, quite simply, and he doesn't need Congress to do it. So it's easy. He's a businessman and he knows how cash flow works. As a businessman, he knows that business certainty is important, and uncertainty is important in deal negotiating, and that is what we're seeing in the behavior of someone who is very agile at that game. But I don't want to play games with Canadians, and my job is not to take that for granted and to think I can just sit at home and do nothing. And if I don't think it's about the border, I don't have the luxury of just presuming that it won't be. We need to go and talk to the people that have Mr. Trump's ear, whether that's Tom Homan or Kristi Noem, and I'll continue to do that because Canadians put me here, and if I'm not doing that, I shouldn't be here.
For Canadians watching right now who feel a lot of anxiety about this, do you think, I mean, has anyone told you, are we going to get like on Monday, hey, it's not coming, it's coming, or are we all just sitting here waiting for Tuesday?
Well, I think Canadians are ready to fight, and what I've seen is an unprecedented surge in patriotism, whether it's the hockey game or just people coming up to me and saying, go Canada, we're ready to fight for this. Canadians have a pretty high threshold. We're also a practical nation. This is a forgotten history fact, but we sent a guy down, a father of Confederation, during the Gettysburg Address, and you know what he's doing? He was trying to negotiate a trade deal, a reciprocity treaty. So this isn't new to us. We're practical people, and we'll keep fighting for Canadians.
But did they indicate, like, by Sunday we'll tell you if they're coming for sure? By
no,
Monday?
There's no certainty on this. It'll be hanging over our head until we know, and we'll probably know at the same time the Canadians know.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Minister, thanks very much for making the time. I appreciate it.